They never saw her coming, not because she was hidden, but because they refused to see. She was there every day, in the data they ignored, in the meetings where her voice was brushed aside, in the silence they mistook for weakness. The quiet black woman tucked into the corner of a high-rise office, passed over like she was part of the furniture. They mocked her, dismissed her, rewrote her work in someone else's name. To them, she was background noise. But in truth, she was the one person in the entire building who understood exactly what was happening and exactly how to end it. By the time they realized what she really was, their names were already marked, their futures already unraveling. If you felt that shift, like and subscribe for the rest. Drop a comment. Where are you watching from? And what would you have done if you were her? Zaria Whitfield had always believed in the quiet power of discipline. She wasn't the type to draw attention, but her work spoke volumes, clean, accurate, predictive modeling that had pulled the company out of a disastrous forecasting error last quarter. It had been her model, her logic, her nights of running simulations and sleepless corrections that saved their profits. But nobody said her name during the all-hands call when the department was praised. That should have been the first sign. Monday arrived too fast. She stood in front of the floor-length mirror in her modest apartment, adjusting the collar of her navy blouse. Her natural curls were pulled into a bun. A single silver pendant lay against her collarbone. She looked composed, professional, ready. The glass conference room on the 12th floor of Halden and Rowe Analytics was a shrine to capitalist ambition. Floor-to-ceiling windows bathed the space in cold light. A table made of blackened steel bisected the room, surrounded by 14 leather chairs. The division's quarterly kickoff was where reputations were made. Zaria clutched her tablet, her slides preloaded and rehearsed. She had triple-checked everything. Her adaptive market response model was already projected to save the company $2.3 million in Q3. She'd even color-coded the dashboard for executive clarity. As people filtered in Mason Blake, Caroline Knox, a few directors, Zaria kept her head down. She was scheduled third in the lineup. That was a good sign. Bryce Halden strolled in 15 minutes late, the scent of woodsy cologne trailing behind his perfectly tailored suit. He carried a coffee cup, his phone still pressed to his ear. His presence dropped the room's temperature. "Hold on," he said into the phone, pausing mid-step. He'd spotted her. "Did someone leave the mailroom door open?" he asked, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Zaria, right? You sure you're in the right meeting?" A few chuckles broke the awkward silence. Zaria froze, unsure if she should respond or ignore it. She glanced around. Some people smiled uncomfortably. Others looked away. Her throat tightened. "I'm presenting the Q2 forecast," she said softly. Bryce blinked dramatically. "You? Huh." He took the seat at the head of the table, legs sprawled casually. "Guess we're diversifying the presenter list." Cool. He sipped his coffee and turned to Mason. "You see this model yet?" Mason, a recent hire with a finance degree and family ties to the board, shrugged. "I skimmed it. Looks decent." Bryce clapped his hands. "Perfect. Mason, you lead the section. Let's see what executive presence looks like with some polish." Zaria's fingers curled around her stylus. She opened her mouth to protest, but stopped herself. Her heart pounded. The slides were hers. The work was hers. Mason's screen flashed to life on the monitor. He hesitated, stumbling over her formula descriptions. Bryce didn't care. He nodded, offered shallow praise, and joked about real talent rising. Zaria sat in silence, reduced to a ghost in the corner. When the meeting ended, Bryce slapped Mason on the back and told him to swing by his office for lunch plans. No one acknowledged Zaria as they filed out. She stayed behind, pretending to tidy her files. One of the assistants, a soft-spoken woman named Erin, passed by and muttered, "Sorry." That was all. Zaria walked back to her desk, numb. Her access to the model had been revoked. Mason now had editing control. The group chat pinged with congratulations to him. Bryce's message read, "Great instinct choosing you to present. Strong leadership potential." Her inbox remained empty. She logged out early, citing a dentist appointment. Outside, the sky had turned gray. Rain pelted the pavement. Her umbrella snapped in the wind halfway down 9th Avenue. She pressed her scarf tighter around her neck and kept walking. At home, she stood in the bathroom, staring at her reflection. Her skin looked tired. Her eyes, sharp, intelligent eyes, seemed dimmer. She ran water over her hands, letting it pool before splashing her face. Later that night, she sat in bed with her laptop open. She reread the data model and every note she'd taken. Her version had precision. Mason's lacked variable sensitivity. He wouldn't even catch the seasonal lag issue in regional demand spikes. The humiliation wasn't just professional. It was personal. Every second of that moment had been carved into her skin like a scar, and she felt it with every breath she took. But she had always known how to gather herself. Zarya rose, dressed, and returned to Halden and Rowe Analytics with a determined step, despite the lingering sting. She decided to do what professionals did when mistreated: document and report. She spent the first hour compiling every email, every dataset, every dated version of the forecasting model. She packaged everything neatly with a clear subject line: formal complaint, misconduct in forecasting presentation reassignment. She sent it to HR, copied her direct manager, and closed her laptop with a quiet breath of resolve. By lunch, there was a response: "Let's meet at 1:30 p.m. to discuss." It seemed quick, too quick. But Zarya tried to stay hopeful. She'd done everything right. She hadn't lashed out, she hadn't caused a scene, and her complaint was precise. At 1:28, she entered the HR conference room, a sterile space with pale blue walls and a window overlooking the lower courtyard. Rachel Timmons from Human Resources waited inside with a clipboard and a weak smile. Rachel, blonde, cheery, and always just trying to keep things neutral, gestured for Zarya to sit. "Hi, Zarya. Thanks for coming in." "Of course," Zarya said, her voice even. "I'm here to discuss what happened yesterday." Rachel's smile tightened. "Right. So I looked over your complaint, and I just want to start by saying that we take these things very seriously." Zarya's heart picked up. Maybe this would go differently than she expected. But then Rachel continued. "After reviewing your message and speaking briefly with Mr. Halden," Zarya's eyebrows lifted. "You already spoke to him?" "Yes," Rachel said, as if this were completely standard. He explained the situation as a team dynamic adjustment. His exact words were, "I was trying to motivate her. She's very capable, just needs to learn to own the room." So mocking me in front of a room full of people and taking away my model was motivational. Zarya's voice was calm but edged. Rachel's smile never broke. "I understand how it might have felt, but Bryce has a direct leadership style. Some people respond well to it, some find it a bit challenging." Zarya blinked. "I documented everything. My contributions, the timeline, the assignments. The data doesn't lie." "We're not disputing that," Rachel said quickly. "Your work is valued. But in terms of presentation delivery and executive presence, those are subjective evaluations. So I did the work, and because I'm not loud or charming enough, I don't get credit? We're simply saying," Rachel said, adjusting her clipboard, "that sometimes in this environment, assertiveness matters. This isn't about race or gender, just team performance and cohesion." Zarya stared at her, heart sinking. She recognized the words. She'd heard them in different forms before, always in soft tones, always wrapped in smiles. It wasn't personal, they always said, but it always felt like it was. "So nothing will be done?" she asked. Rachel hesitated. "I'll note that we had this discussion, and if further incidents arise, we can re-evaluate." That was the answer. Zarya stood slowly. "Thank you for your time." Rachel nodded, her eyes already drifting toward the next item on her calendar. Zarya left the room, her jaw tight. She returned to her desk only to discover a new surprise. Her access to the forecasting dashboard had been removed entirely. She clicked through folders, permissions, project links. Access denied. She emailed IT. The response came minutes later. Access was modified under direction from your supervisor. Please consult with him for reauthorization. She stared at the message for a long time, fingers still poised over the keyboard. No one had informed her. No one had asked. They'd simply taken her off the project, completely. She pushed back from her desk, trying to remain composed. She walked down the hall to her manager, Eric Phelps, whose door was cracked open. He looked up when she knocked gently. "Zaria, hey." "I was removed from the dashboard," she said, careful to keep her voice measured. Eric nodded too quickly. "Yeah, that was part of the restructure Bryce mentioned. He wants you to pivot to some support workflows for the next couple weeks." "Support workflows?" she repeated. "Like what?" "QA testing, data cleanup, some post-project tasks. Look, it's not permanent. Bryce just felt your energy might be better used smoothing out back-end issues for now. We'll circle back to bigger projects soon." "So I'm doing admin tasks?" No, Eric said, smiling like it made any difference. "Support. You're a real asset, Zaria. We just need all hands on deck in different areas." She thanked him. She walked out. She returned to her desk. She clicked on a link to her new assignment, reconciling line items for an outdated sales report from Q4 of the previous year. She closed her eyes, breathed in deeply, then opened the spreadsheet. As she entered the office, she noticed the shift immediately. It wasn't anything overt, just a quietness that seemed to settle when she stepped into the shared workspace. The normal good mornings were replaced with tight-lipped nods or the subtle glance-away reflex of coworkers suddenly busy with screens. She told herself she was imagining it, but the unease dug deeper with each hour. Mid-morning, she passed by the espresso bar near the West Wing conference area and caught the tail end of a conversation between two analysts. She only got into Northwestern because of quotas. You know how that works. The words struck like glass. The speaker hadn't noticed her yet, but the tone was unmistakably Bryce's voice, smooth, theatrical, amused. He stood with three male colleagues, holding a cappuccino and leaning casually against the marble counter like he owned the building. "I mean, come on," Bryce continued, unaware or unconcerned that Zaria was within earshot. "She gets this fancy degree, can't even present in a room without turning into a statue. You think she got through on merit?" Someone chuckled. Maybe they just needed to hit a number. Bryce smirked. Exactly. Her resume screams DI special. That word, special, dripped with calculated condescension. Zaria stood frozen just around the corner, eyes wide, chest rising slowly with each deliberate breath. She didn't move. She couldn't. Her ears rang as the laughter carried through the air, wrapping around her like a slow, crushing weight. She turned and walked away before they saw her. Her hands trembled as she returned to her desk. The spreadsheet on her screen blurred, the numbers useless. Her heart thudded against her ribs as she tried to focus, but the sound of Bryce's voice replayed in her head on loop. She knew exactly what he was doing now. If removing her access and diminishing her presence wasn't enough, he'd poison her reputation. And people were listening. That afternoon, the company hosted its quarterly networking mixer at a trendy rooftop bar in Midtown. The event had been marketed as a Culture Connect evening, meant to encourage cross-departmental mingling, especially for junior talent like Zaria. Despite everything, she decided to go. Not attending would only feed the narrative that she didn't engage, didn't show initiative, didn't have presence. She arrived just after 6 p.m. in a soft gray dress and black heels, her badge clipped neatly to the side of her purse. The rooftop pulsed with ambient music and polite laughter. String lights cast a golden haze over the terrace, and servers carried trays of hors d'oeuvres and wine. She spotted a few familiar faces and nodded politely, weaving through small clusters of analysts and execs. Bryce stood near the center, of course, surrounded by regional leads and senior consultants, drink in hand, laughing like a man with nothing to fear. She kept her distance, finding a quiet spot near a potted plant and sipping sparkling water. For 20 minutes, no one approached. She tried to start conversations, brief introductions, polite small talk, but each time they fizzled within seconds. The conversations around her seemed to close the moment she stepped in, like someone lowering the volume on a radio until only static remained. At one point, a director for marketing began walking toward her with a friendly smile, only to stop mid-step, glance at Bryce, then pivot toward Mason and start chatting with him instead. Zaria watched it happen with a sinking feeling. A few minutes later, the MC announced a welcome toast. The music dropped and everyone turned toward the center where the division president began speaking. "We're so proud of the talent in this room," she said, raising her glass. "These faces represent the future of our company." Bryce stepped up next with his signature grin. "Let's highlight a few stars, shall we?" he said smoothly. "Mason Blake, our rising data wizard. Reggie from compliance, your report saved us a fortune. And Caroline, whose customer insights just landed us a major West Coast client." Zarya waited for her name. She hoped, irrationally, that something fair might happen. But it didn't. Bryce paused, then concluded, "Let's all raise a glass to those who step up, show initiative, and lead from the front." Applause erupted. Zarya clapped once, slowly, then let her hands fall to her sides. She stood among her peers, yet felt miles away, invisible in plain sight. The executives made their rounds, offering handshakes and eye contact to the chosen few. They bypassed Zarya like she was furniture. A few exchanged polite smiles, but no one introduced her. No one asked her what she worked on. No one asked her anything. At the end of the event, she walked down 38 floors to the street instead of taking the elevator. Her legs shook as she reached the sidewalk. She stood there for a full minute, staring at her reflection in a store window, trying to remember who she had been just 3 days earlier. Inside, she was unraveling, not just from the humiliation, but from the chilling realization that it was working. Bryce's strategy wasn't just about sidelining her. It was about erasing her from relevance. First, he discredited her voice, then her work, and now her presence. Slowly, systematically, like a surgeon dissecting confidence from identity. That night, Zarya pulled up her LinkedIn page and stared at it. Every move she made at Halden and Rowe now felt like pushing against a current designed to drown her in slow inches. She powered on her laptop, preparing for the upcoming webinar that Bryce had emphasized repeatedly over the past week. It was a quarterly sync involving analysts, regional sales managers, and division leaders. Everyone from East Coast to Midwest operations would be online. Over 150 attendees on one call, a large-scale demonstration of leadership visibility. A week ago, Zarya had been assigned a segment covering market anomaly modeling. It was her original concept, one she developed before the model was stripped from her and handed to Mason. Even with the project reassignment, Bryce had said she'd present the anomaly data since it came from her area of expertise. But with everything that had happened, her reputation quietly tarnished, her voice diminished. Zarya approached the task with a quiet resolve to simply perform. She checked the link to the webinar at 8:45 a.m., 15 minutes before the scheduled start. The screen loaded, then blinked. Presenter access revoked. You are viewing as a guest. Confused, Zarya hit refresh. Nothing changed. She reopened her Outlook calendar and double-checked the invite. Her name still appeared in the presenter list. Her inbox showed no updates or changes. She opened Teams and messaged IT support directly. "Hi, I'm scheduled to present this morning, but my access is restricted. Could you please confirm if I've been removed?" She waited. At 8:53, a response arrived. "Hi Zarya, your credentials were adjusted by request from management. Please consult your supervisor for changes." Her pulse quickened. She immediately emailed Bryce and CC'd Eric. "Hello, I was under the impression I would be presenting this morning as scheduled. My access has been revoked. Please confirm." No reply. At 8:58, the webinar launched. Zarya joined as a silent observer, her camera dark, her mic disabled. The virtual room filled with tiles of faces, chat bubbles, and greetings. Then Bryce's voice took over. "Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining the Q2 Market Response Review. We've got a full lineup today and some sharp insights coming your way. But before we start, quick housekeeping. One of our analysts had some technical issues, so we'll be skipping the anomaly segment. Probably for the best," he added with a chuckle. "We don't want to confuse anyone with equations that look like alien code." A few polite laughs filtered in. Bryce's tone shifted into casual banter. "Besides, you know how it is when some folks forget to plug in their mic or show up muted. Our silent partner strikes again." Laughter now. Sharper, louder. Zarya sat at her desk, motionless, the sound echoing in her ears like gunfire. Her screen showed Bryce grinning, leaning back in his office chair, while Mason nodded beside him, clearly aware of the joke's target. Zarya's chest tightened, her hands numb on the keyboard. It wasn't just that she'd been removed. It was the spectacle of it, the deliberate, public swipe made under the guise of humor. She scanned the attendee list. Her name wasn't even visible. The system had placed her in generic viewer mode. No identity, no voice, only silence. As Bryce transitioned into the next topic, Zarya's vision blurred. Her heart thudded in her throat. This was calculated. Her removal, her silencing, and now this mockery in front of the company. He wasn't hiding it anymore. Bryce didn't need to. He knew no one would challenge him. No one had so far. After the webinar ended, she stared at her screen in a daze. Her inbox was empty. No explanation, no apology, nothing. The only message she received was from Leah in compliance. I saw the webinar. That wasn't right. Call me if you want to talk. Zarya didn't respond. She couldn't find the words. Around her, coworkers resumed their day like nothing happened. She passed the break room and heard Mason laughing with two sales associates. Guess we dodged a bullet this morning, he said. That slide deck was a disaster anyway. They didn't see her walk past. Or maybe they did. Maybe they didn't care. She returned to her desk, her dignity hanging by a thread. Every word Bryce had spoken had been laced with condescension, delivered with the confidence of someone who knew he could say anything and suffer nothing. He had turned her into a joke, the silent partner who couldn't plug in a mic. But Zarya's mic had never been off. They had just unplugged it, intentionally, systematically. That night, Zarya didn't go straight home. When the company announced its annual corporate retreat, a 3-day excursion to an upscale lakeside lodge in Vermont, Zarya hesitated. The email framed it as an opportunity to recharge, reconnect, and realign, and attendance was highly encouraged for mid- and senior-level staff. In truth, it was a glorified bonding experience where office politics intensified under the guise of mores and strategy. Declining would brand her as disengaged. Attending could expose her to more humiliation. She chose the latter, unwilling to give Bryce the satisfaction of her absence. She boarded the company shuttle at dawn on Friday. Seated alone with headphones she didn't turn on. Others chatted around her, animated and relaxed. She felt like a passenger in someone else's movie. When a shuttle arrived at the lodge, a massive timber structure nestled against a glassy lake, guests were greeted with champagne and velvet welcome packets. Zarya accepted hers with a nod and asked the receptionist for her room assignment. The woman scanned the list and paused. Oh, room 3B Annex Hall. She hesitated. That's in the maintenance wing. Probably a clerical error. Zarya blinked. Maintenance wing. The woman smiled quickly. Just one hallway over from the main building. It's a bit smaller, no lake view, but I'm sure it's fine. Let me know if you'd like to raise it with your coordinator. Zarya glanced around. A group of interns, first-year associates barely through orientation, were being handed keys to the lakefront suites. One even exclaimed, "Whoa, my room has a hot tub." She accepted her key without protest and followed the dim corridor to a door near a stack of janitorial equipment. Inside, her room smelled faintly of bleach. There was no window, just a single twin bed, a desk bolted to the floor, and a lamp with a broken switch. She didn't unpack. Later, in the main lodge, Zarya forced herself into the group icebreaker activity. The large conference hall had been converted into a faux campfire circle, with fake logs and projection screens displaying flickering flames. Bryce stood in the center, holding a clipboard and a grin. "All right, let's warm things up," he announced. "First up, let's go around and say your name, your favorite childhood memory, and if you were an object in the office, what would you be?" People chuckled. The circle began. Mason said he'd be the espresso machine because everyone depends on me to get moving. Caroline joked she'd be the Wi-Fi router. If I go down, nobody gets work done. Zarya's turn came. She hesitated, then said quietly, I guess I'd be the calendar. I keep everything on track, even if no one looks directly at me." The response was silence, until Bryce laughed aloud. "Well, I'd say background prop, but sure, calendar works too." The room erupted in laughter. Not cruel, not loud, just the kind of laughter people offer to a joke made by someone in power, where disagreement feels dangerous. Zarya nodded slowly, forcing a smile, her throat dry. She wanted to disappear. That evening, the group gathered for dinner at the lodge's ballroom, where strings of warm lights crisscrossed the ceiling and classical jazz played softly in the background. Each table seated 8. Zarya scanned the room and noticed the seating chart. Her name was scribbled at table 12 by the emergency exit, next to the speakers, far from any executives. Bryce, Mason, and the other division heads sat together at the center, their table marked with a small sign that read Leadership Circle. She sat alone for a full 15 minutes before a junior recruiter joined her, apologized for being late, and then spent the entire meal on her phone. The meal was exquisite: roasted duck, creamy polenta, handcrafted desserts. But Zarya barely tasted anything. Every minute felt like performance. The words, the laughter, the glances all moved around her, never toward her. She wasn't invited to the after-dinner fireside chats. She wasn't asked to join the late-night card game in the executive lounge. When she passed by the main hall later that night, she heard Bryce laughing with Mason. "She looked like a ghost all day," he said, voice raised just enough for it to travel. "Someone needs to remind her this is a retreat, not a funeral." More laughter followed. Zarya returned to her room in the annex. The door creaked as it shut behind her. She sat on the edge of the bed and stared at her reflection in the warped mirror above the desk. Her face held no expression. Her eyes were dry. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She simply sat in silence, the weight of erasure pressing down on her chest like a stone. She felt less than forgotten. She felt non-existent. But somewhere beneath the stillness, something else stirred. She hadn't spoken to anyone since dinner. No one had approached her. No one had asked her to join them for drinks or cards or fireside chats. She wasn't included in any of the group photos being snapped across the lodge and posted to the team's Slack channel with hashtags like #LeadershipRetreat and #TeamSynergy. The few glances she'd received were fleeting, guilty, and loaded with that same message she'd come to recognize. "I'm sorry, but I'm not risking myself for you." She made her way down the gravel path to the lodge's dining hall for the executive briefing breakfast, her badge bouncing lightly against her chest. She had been told by Eric via a bland calendar invite that she should attend to listen in on strategic updates. When she entered the room, Bryce was already holding court at the front. Standing near a projection screen, coffee in hand, sleeves rolled to the elbows. Mason and Caroline sat flanking him, grinning as if they were the stars of a sitcom no one else had been cast in. Zarya took a seat near the back and opened her notebook. For the first 30 minutes, she didn't speak. She listened as Bryce outlined Q4 strategy, peppering in jokes and anecdotes that had nothing to do with the data. Then came the slide, an old demand curve projection from the Boston regional branch, mislabeled and misattributed. Zarya recognized it immediately. The math was wrong. If that slide went live in Monday's presentation, it would cost the company thousands in allocation misfires. She hesitated, her pen poised above the page. Then she raised her hand. Bryce looked up, surprised. "Yes, Zarya." She cleared her throat. "That chart has a scaling error. It doesn't account for the adjusted Q3 anomalies. If you look at the baseline, it's misaligned by 2%. That'll affect your whole top-down distribution." A pause. The room was quiet. Bryce stared at her for a moment too long, then let out a short laugh. "Well, look who found her voice." A few people chuckled nervously. Zarya's stomach twisted, but she held her gaze steady. Bryce continued, "Tell you what, let's let the real analysts talk today. We're trying to build momentum here, not nitpick decimals." He turned back to the screen, effectively ending the conversation. Zarya lowered her hand slowly. The blood in her face felt hot, and yet her fingertips were cold. She wrote nothing for the rest of the session. Afterward, as the group dispersed for a coffee break, She walked through the lodge lobby toward the lounge to clear her head. That's when she heard him. Bryce was standing at the bar with Mason and 2 junior consultants, all of them half leaning over cocktails and laughing. "Seriously," Bryce said, his voice carrying just enough. "She's lucky to be here. 10 years ago, she wouldn't even get past reception." The group erupted into easy laughter. Zarya stopped in her tracks. She wasn't visible from their angle, shielded by a support beam and the curve of the hallway, but she could hear every word. "She's all quiet, always watching, scribbling in that damn notebook like she's building a bunker. No spark, no edge. You know what I mean? People like that don't lead." "But she's smart," Mason added, sounding hesitant. Bryce scoffed. "Sure. So are calculators. Does it mean I'm promoting one?" More laughter followed, clinking glasses, and the muffled hum of music spilling from the lodge speakers. Zarya backed away slowly, her breath shallow. She didn't return to the main hall. She walked instead down to the edge of a lake, away from the retreat and the people and the noise. The air was crisp, her shoes sinking slightly into the damp shoreline as she stared at her reflection in the water. Everything in her chest felt twisted and raw, the weight of humiliation pressing against her ribs like stone. The silence wasn't just external anymore. It was growing inside her, replacing her voice, her certainty, her belief in fairness. She had reached the final threshold of erasure, when even your resistance becomes irrelevant. That afternoon, the team gathered for a final strategy wrap-up in the conference center. Zarya sat near the back again, saying nothing. Bryce spoke for an hour, weaving anecdotes and buzzwords into a performance designed to secure his next quarterly bonus. He never looked at her. When the session ended, she lingered in her seat, letting the others leave first. The lodge's Wi-Fi was quiet at this hour, everyone still tucked into their premium suites or curled around dying embers of last night's retreat fire. Zarya sat on the edge of her bed, the soft glow of her screen lighting her face as she began pulling up credentials she hadn't used in over a year, internal protocol indexes, secure compliance request portals, and most notably, her personal board-level clearance code. It was a forgotten perk from her graduate fellowship with the Ethics and Oversight Committee, a program she had joined before transferring into data analytics full-time. The clearance remained active, buried deep within the system, and she had kept it clean, never using it. Until now. She verified the access twice, her fingers steady, her breath even. Then she clicked into the booking system, selected Boardroom E private use, and submitted the reservation for 6:30 a.m. Sunday morning, 3 hours before the official retreat agenda resumed. She titled the session Emergency Division Ethics Review and added a second layer of executive visibility, which would notify not only the division heads, but also key HR, compliance, and board liaison personnel. The system processed her request, flashed a confirmation screen, and then went quiet. Zarya didn't smile. She didn't sigh in relief. She simply closed the laptop and leaned back against the headboard, eyes wide open in the dark. She waited. At precisely 5:45 a.m., she rose again, dressed in black slacks and a crisp white blouse, and pulled her hair back into a single smooth braid. The hallway was silent as she stepped out of her room, a single duffel bag slung over one shoulder, her badge clipped firmly to her lapel. She walked past rows of luxury suites without looking in. She passed the fireside lounge where Bryce had held court just hours before, where he had laughed and drank and mocked her worth like it was entertainment. She descended to the lodge's main lobby and entered Boardroom E with 15 minutes to spare. The room was minimalist and formal, with a long walnut table, 12 high-backed leather chairs, and a projection screen that blinked quietly as she connected her drive. At 6:30 a.m., the alerts went out. Phones buzzed on nightstands and hotel desks. Department heads stirred in their beds, blinking at the unexpected message. Zarya Whitfield, Emergency Division Ethics Session. Some ignored it. Others sat up, confused, curious. A few, those who recognized the clearance code embedded in the alert, hurried to dress. By 6:45, the door to Boardroom E opened, and the first person entered. Lisa Ortega, head of compliance, her eyes sharp with surprise. "Zarya," she asked, half uncertain. "What's going on?" Zarya nodded politely. "Thank you for coming. Please take a seat." Within minutes, others followed. Alan Tran from Internal Audit, Renee Caldwell from HR, even Gregory Madsen, the senior legal advisor who rarely attended on-site events, slipped into a chair, his phone still in hand as he read the meeting invite twice. Then at 6:59, the door opened again and Bryce Halden stepped in, his face still clouded with sleep, hair unkempt, retreat hoodie zipped halfway. He stopped cold when he saw the room. His gaze swept the table, recognizing the heavy hitters. "What the hell is this?" he demanded, forcing a smirk. "Did someone authorize a Sunday morning ambush?" "This is a sanctioned ethics review," Zarya said calmly. "Filed under Protocol E-1217. I've attached my clearance and all supporting documentation to each of your emails." Bryce laughed once, incredulous. "You've got to be kidding me." But no one was laughing. The others had opened their files. Gregory leaned forward. "These logs," he began scrolling. "Zarya, did you compile these yourself?" "Yes," she said. "I've been recording verbal incidents and compiling system access data, model manipulation history, and communication records for the last 5 months." She turned toward the projection screen and clicked through the first slide. "Let's begin with internal reassignment of project ownership without justification, followed by evidence of systemic suppression of author attribution on analytics reports." Bryce's smile faltered. "This is absurd. You don't have the authority." "She does," Lisa cut in, holding up her phone. "This clearance is valid, and this session is protected by whistleblower policy. If you interrupt again, you'll be in direct violation of Code P6. Bryce opened his mouth, then shut it. Zarya continued, her tone even but piercing. "Following the reassignment of my forecast model to Mason Blake, I documented over 12 instances where my contributions were presented without credit. I also recorded internal communications referencing me as a quota filler and several comments made publicly during company events that constitute hostile workplace behavior." Faces around the table tightened. Renee from HR leaned forward, jaw clenched. "Is there audio?" "Yes," Zarya said. "Voice transcriptions and original files are available in the appendix." Slide after slide illuminated the room. Dates, quotes, screenshots, model comparisons, access logs showing Bryce and Mason editing Zarya's original datasets without proper attribution. Then came the recordings. The joke during the webinar. The background prop remark. The bar conversation, 10 years ago. She wouldn't even get past reception. The room fell silent as Bryce's voice played from her phone, clear and unmistakable. No one would get a clear answer, only fragments. That Zarya had called it, that board-level people had attended, that Bryce had looked like someone hit him with a chair made of fax. Most employees didn't even know Zarya had clearance to initiate anything beyond a software patch request. Yet there it was, her name etched into the subject line of the internal audit email that now sat blinking unread in every division head's inbox. While Bryce tried to regain control, holding impromptu hallway chats and forcing smiles, those at the session had gone silent. They weren't defending him. They weren't speaking at all. Zarya, meanwhile, did not return to the group. She skipped the morning vision alignment hike, ignored the brunch invitation from Eric, and didn't show up for the team photo scheduled at the dock. She didn't need to. Her absence was louder than Bryce's presence. At 10:17 a.m., an all-staff email dropped. It was brief, clinical, and sent from the Executive Office of Compliance. A formal investigation has been launched regarding claims presented during the June 21st Emergency Division Ethics Session. All relevant personnel are advised to retain all communications and refrain from discussion pending review. No one had ever seen language that direct. No one had ever seen it include so many recipients in BCC. Bryce tried to play it cool, telling Mason loudly during lunch that this was all going to blow over, and that people were just being sensitive because someone finally played the system back. But his voice was tighter now, the bluster tinged with a trace of panic. Zarya, meanwhile, sat quietly in a small side conference room near the main lodge fireplace, sipping coffee alone. She had no entourage. She didn't need one. She had clarity. By early afternoon, word of the investigation reached the boardroom in Manhattan, where Chairwoman Elaine Rodwell, known for her precise language and zero tolerance for PR disasters, convened a virtual emergency meeting. She already had the files Zaria had sent. She had also received something else, a copy of Zaria's personnel file and a separate folder labeled Special Oversight Placement Initiative Phase 2. Inside it was the truth. Zaria Whitfield had not merely been a junior analyst. She held dual certifications in corporate governance and forensic auditing. Her placement in Bryce's division had been strategic, an embedded observation assignment signed off by the Office of Compliance after multiple red flags had emerged regarding performance disparities, attrition anomalies, and informal complaints that never reached escalation. Her profile had been flagged during her ethics fellowship 2 years earlier. Her credentials had been sealed under internal protection codes to avoid influencing behavior. She was the test, the observer, the safeguard. And she had passed. The revelation hit the upper levels like a lightning strike. Legal called compliance. Compliance called HR. HR stopped responding to Bryce's messages altogether. By evening, his calendar access was suspended, and his assistant quietly handed over all department records to the board's audit liaison. Meanwhile, Zaria prepared to leave. She didn't announce her departure. She packed her single bag, returned the key to her annex room without ceremony, and walked down the gravel path toward the edge of the resort, where a black town car waited near the gate. The driver opened the door, nodded, and she slipped inside. Behind her, the lodge began to stir with the weight of consequences. Mason stood by the lake with a pale face and trembling hands, watching as Eric frantically tapped at his phone, trying to reach anyone, who could tell him what to do. But no one replied. Bryce sat in the executive lounge, alone now, his face pale, a drink untouched on the table beside him. He had stopped talking, for once. At 6:32 p.m., a second email was sent out from the office of the chairwoman. Effective immediately, Bryce Halden is placed on administrative leave pending further investigation. All inquiries should be directed to Interim Division Liaison Kate Arlo. The message was simple, final, no room for rebuttal. The team's Slack channels went silent. Then, slowly, like the opening scene of a silent movie reel, new messages began appearing. Quiet words from those who had stayed silent too long. The building's morning hum moved without him. Assistants shuffled papers. Executives whispered in corridors. But no one greeted him. No one made eye contact. When the elevator doors opened, Bryce stepped into the main hallway outside the boardroom, only to find the usual assistant gone. Instead, 2 security compliance officers flanked the entrance, checking names against a digital tablet. Bryce gave his name. One officer nodded silently and opened the door. The room was not unfamiliar. Long table, city skyline behind floor-length windows, 12 chairs arranged in strategic order. But the atmosphere had changed. It wasn't just formality in the air. It was judgment. At the head of the table sat Chairwoman Elaine Rodwell, her silver hair pulled back, glasses low on her nose, every line on her face carved from discipline and time. Next to her were Gregory Mattson from Legal, Lisa Ortega from Compliance, and an external auditor with a notepad already half-filled. Bryce took his seat halfway down, across from where he'd once smirked his way through performance reviews. No smirks today. Elaine didn't waste time. This is a formal disciplinary review in response to the emergency ethics session held June 21st. You are advised that all statements will be documented and held against your record. Bryce nodded stiffly. I've reviewed the documents. There's been a misunderstanding. There's no misunderstanding. Gregory cut in, voice sharp. You undermined an employee's contributions, made inappropriate remarks in both public and private settings, manipulated project access, and encouraged a hostile work culture for personal gain. We've got emails, recordings, testimonial confirmations, and revised audit logs showing you removed her authorship tags deliberately. Bryce shifted, color rising in his face. This is completely overblown. People joke. Stop, Elaine said, her tone cool and absolute. This isn't a discussion. This is a reckoning. Lisa tapped her screen and projected several files. Bryce watched silent as his words played back across the room. Quote of filler. Background prop. 10 years ago, she wouldn't even get past reception. They were his voice, undeniable. In the past, Bryce had been able to talk his way around facts, make charm his weapon, spin context into ambiguity. But not now. The facts stood still, immutable. Zaria Whitfield, Elaine continued, is a certified auditor with dual credentials. She was placed in your department for observation due to early red flags. Her performance has been exemplary. Your treatment of her, especially once you realized she posed a threat to your influence, demonstrates a pattern of discrimination and abuse of authority. Bryce looked around, hoping to find an ally, but the seats around him remained stone-faced. Even Eric Phelps, once his closest internal advocate, had submitted a statement distancing himself. Mason hadn't shown up. Caroline declined to comment. The silence surrounding him was no longer a weapon of his own making. It was a mirror, and it showed a man alone. Your division will be placed under interim leadership, Elaine said. Effective immediately, your title as vice president is revoked. You will be reassigned pending performance review. Your discretionary bonus has been frozen. You will receive no severance or separation package should further findings result in termination. Bryce's mouth opened, then closed again. He swallowed hard. You owe her an apology, Lisa said. Public, immediate, and sincere. That hit harder than the demotion. Bryce had never apologized publicly in his life, not even in schoolyard fights. He built his reputation on dominance, on never blinking first. But now, blinking was all he could do. I'll do it, he said quietly. Elaine nodded once. Then write it. Submit it by 5 p.m. today. It will be reviewed before being distributed internally and externally as needed. The meeting adjourned. No handshake. No go on bis. Bryce walked out, his shoulders hunched. He passed the same assistants, who now looked through him like glass. No one offered a glance of pity. His keycard no longer granted him access to the executive suite. He returned to the lower floor where temporary workspaces were assigned, into a windowless office meant for contractors and display staff. He sat at a plastic desk and opened his laptop. The screen glowed back at him, blank. 3 months passed like water over stone, wearing down the sharp edges of what once had seemed immovable. The corporate world around Halden and Rowe adjusted to the fallout like any large organism encountering infection. It cut, cauterized, and slowly restructured. Bryce Halden, once the youngest vice president to be given his own division, now occupied a small shared workspace on the 3rd floor, tucked between policy archives and compliance admin offices. The glass walls of the building still reflected the Manhattan skyline, but the view from his new desk offered only a concrete service alley and a flickering exit sign. Gone were the catered executive lunches, the town car pickups, and the air of invincibility. What remained was routine, quiet, repetitive, unglamorous work. And Bryce performed it. Not well at first. For the first month, he moved like a man sedated, numb behind the eyes, fingers fumbling over tasks that used to be beneath him. He sorted through archived misconduct reports, formatted training templates, scheduled meetings he no longer led. He didn't argue. He didn't complain. And most notably, he didn't speak much. It was clear to everyone, especially those in compliance who had read the case file, who he had been and what he'd done. But instead of hostility, he encountered something worse: irrelevance. No one feared him now. No one envied him. He was just a man at a desk with his name removed from every corridor plaque. By the 2nd month, the humiliation had settled into something more complex: reflection. Bryce found himself noticing things he'd never paid attention to before. The way junior staff hesitated to speak up in meetings. The glances shared between marginalized employees when policies were changed without input. The way small slights, once dismissed as nothing, landed like weights on people already carrying too much. He began listening more. He started volunteering for tasks others passed over. He logged every detail, kept notes, asked questions he never used to bother with. Still, it wasn't enough. Not yet. It wasn't until the quarterly DI session that everything shifted again. It was required. Compliance now ensured every employee, regardless of rank, attended and completed each module. Bryce logged in late that morning, expecting another passive experience. Click-through videos, pre-recorded lectures, quiz at the end. But as the module loaded, he paused. The title read, Silent Systems, Recognizing Structural Bias in Corporate Decision-Making. Presented by Zaria Whitfield. His stomach twisted. He almost clicked out. Almost. But his hand stopped short of the trackpad. He took a breath, leaned back, and pressed play. The screen faded to Zaria's face, not live, not personal, just recorded. Yet her presence was undeniable. She spoke clearly, calmly, her voice steady but cutting in its precision. Bias, she said, doesn't always sound like slurs or look like exclusion. Sometimes it looks like silence, like a raised hand that goes unanswered, like laughter at the expense of credibility, like leadership that mistakes dominance for competence. Bryce watched. He didn't blink. Her presentation continued, outlining how patterns of exclusion form from unchecked assumptions and how systems, designed to appear neutral, often reinforce those biases through omission, through inaction, through fear masquerading as professionalism. The question, Zaria concluded, is not whether bias exists in your space. The question is whether you have the courage to see it, and then to change. The screen went black. Bryce sat still for a long time. When the quiz prompt appeared, he ignored it. Instead, he stood, walked to the corner of the compliance floor where unused stationery was stored, and retrieved a blank envelope and a sheet of linen paper. He returned to his desk, placed his pen to the page, and began writing. Not an email, not a typed message, but a letter. The words came slowly, haltingly at first, then with the momentum of confession. Zaria, he began, I don't expect you to read this. I don't expect forgiveness. What I did, what I allowed to happen, was not just wrong. It was a choice. Repeated, measured, disguised as leadership. You tried to speak, and I made a spectacle of your silence. You worked harder than anyone, and I erased your name. I didn't just fail you. I failed every standard I claimed to uphold. But your session today made me see what I refused to before. You spoke truth that cut through my comfort, and I'm finally listening. Thank you for not breaking, for holding the line, for showing all of us that justice doesn't wait for permission. You didn't raise your voice, but you changed everything. He signed it, folded the page, and sealed the envelope. He didn't send it through inter-office mail. He hand-delivered it to the front desk where the new ethics liaison worked, someone Zaria had mentored quietly during her transition out. He left no return address, no contact number, just his name on the envelope. He didn't tell anyone he'd written it. He didn't wait for a response. In the days that followed, Bryce returned to his routine. But it wasn't the same. He started mentoring new hires, especially those who reminded him of the people he used to overlook. He requested transfer to the training development team and began rewriting modules, making sure every example used real incidents, real stories, real names, his included. When people asked why he was so thorough, he just nodded and kept working. He didn't need redemption to be public. He didn't need applause. He needed to live differently, to be different. Zaria never replied to the letter, but he saw her once, months later, across a conference hall at an industry summit. She was speaking on a panel, surrounded by executives who now listened to her without interruption. Bryce stood in the back of the room, anonymous, quiet, and watched. As she spoke, the crowd leaned in, not just out of respect, but because they understood what she had become, a voice for those still finding theirs. She never looked his way, but at the end, when she thanked her mentors and closed her remarks, she said, "Real leadership doesn't always roar. Sometimes it listens, sometimes it learns, and sometimes when it's brave enough, it changes." Bryce smiled then, just once, and he clapped with everyone else. The end. If this story moved you, don't forget to like and subscribe for more gripping, high-stakes narratives that dive deep into justice, power, and redemption. What did you think of Zaria's journey and Bryce's transformation? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below and tell me where in the world you're watching from.